Thank you, Leonie, and thank you, the organisers, for the invitation to come here and to share with you your experiences and to allow me to learn from you. Unlike Gill number 1, I don't play the drums, but I do ask questions. I was finally nagged, an aged, getting fat, getting sclerotic male who doesn't go anywhere near doctors. I was nagged recently into going for what is referred to as a human MOT. Now, that's a health check. How many of you in the audience go for regular health checks? Why do you do it? Why wouldn't you? Okay, I mean, the normal argument is that prevention's better than cure, better to be told, lose a bit of weight, take more exercise, take an aspirin a day rather than having a stroke, a heart attack, screening for cancer. So you check your health, why don't you check the city's health? That's really, in a sense, the message of today, for me so far. That's just a bit of ad-libbing. I want to clear out the attic first. I mean, we've all got attics. I've got an attic. I've got an ever-expanding attic, it seems, full of junk and rubbish, most of which I don't need, and I need to be selective about what we take forward and what we leave behind, and what we recycle. Recycle or reuse, obviously. So first of all, let's clear out the attic. We need some definitions. I'm really going to just tidy up. I'm only here as in football terms, a sweeper up. I'm just picking up the loose balls behind these wonderfully creative people you've heard from. I'm just a sort of mere pedestrian. So you've just got to look after my text. You've got to look after yourself, because what I want to do is to clear up and try and create some sort of unanimity amongst us. My definition of sustainable urban development is really the capacity for cities to endure. That's what really sustainable urban development's about. And it's really important to recognise that sustainable urbanisation is not about tinkering. It's not about trimming and cutting and dealing with one or two bits. It's not about having a few recycling bins around the city and then allowing the city to continue to consume at the rate of growth which it's consumed in the past. It's really about wholesale change. And sustainable urbanisation requires the explicit recognition that the principles of sustainable development are chiefly about places. It's very easy to sort of simply say, well, the Brundtland principles, think global, act local. No, it's not. It's about thinking and acting global, but it's also about thinking and acting local. I think both the Gills made that point, and the other speakers have reinforced it by some very, very good examples. It also, in a sense, requires people at all levels to recognise that we've got certain obligations, freely entered into agreements from the Brundtland report onwards, and we've not been very good at implementing those obligations. So what are the component parts of sustainable development, and how does that relate to sustainable urbanisation? Well, there's the standard elements. Brundtland was principally not about the environment, it was principally about social inequity and about the social challenge that we face. People forget that. They often talk about sustainable development. They think, oh, it's just a few green tree huggers. We can just sort of buy them off easily. No, it wasn't. It was about the dynamics of change, the social dynamics in urban areas, principally because most of our planet's now urban. It was about the economic inequities which exist as a consequence of past processes. And it was about the environmental dimension. But Brundtland isn't a static picture. Brundtland is about intergenerational equity as well. It's about leaving your kids and grandkids and those who come after with at least the same inheritance that you received. But it's also about intragenerational equity. And that isn't just something about the first world and the third world. It's something about the districts within Melbourne or any other city on the face of this planet. And finally, the bit absolutely ignored in Brundtland is this bit, because Brundtland is about the politics and applications. And what we've seen from all the speakers so far is about politics and applications globally, right down to the very grassroots. So for me, that's clearing out the attic. Facing the future, business as usual. Can we operate on business as usual principles, whatever that means? Can we and it scared the living daylights out of me, Chris. I'm talking to Chris Brown now because he's a Brit. I was scared to death when I heard a group of bankers recently say, well, don't worry, things are getting back to normal. Oh my God, back to normal? So that means, go and read The Economist last week, yeah? Go and read The Economist. Britain is world-class, world-leading in one fundamental statistic. And if you go to page 72 in last week's Economist, there it is. It tells you all about Britain's world leadership. Its world leadership, household debts as a percentage of disposable income. Britain even beats the USA and Canada. We now have personal household debt, which is 158% of annual disposable income. Now that's going some. That's a wonderful achievement. Yeah, it's taken us years to get there. It's really, really difficult. Now, I was told by the organisers I have to entertain you. So, Chris, I'm sure you can answer this. You're debarred. One of our politicians made a joke recently, and he was told he was in terribly bad taste. Let's see who knows the answer. How do you tell the difference between a dead cat at the side of a road and a dead banker at the side of a road? Yep, because somebody's tried to avoid the cat. Okay, so there we are. That's the entertainment. So is that all right, Leonie? I've done the entertainment bit now. So we really need to worry about this idea about business as usual. Don't worry, we've had a recession. We can now get back to business as usual, i.e. we can assume constant increments of growth, and your growth comes at somebody else's impoverishment. Your growth comes at somebody else's lack of resources. Your growth means somebody starves. Your growth means somebody else goes short. Your growth means that somebody else doesn't enjoy the benefit of development. There are shortages of all those fundamental resources, natural, human, and environmental, and so on and so forth. Basically, what we've got to do is move away from this dominant growth paradigm. And that means we've got to try and shrink both absolute consumption in the developed world, and more importantly, we've got to shrink the gap between rich and poor. So we need distributional justice, distributional equity. Equally, for me, we need to shrink the urban ecological footprints. I mean, the statistics here become very puzzling because it depends on which base you use. But the average American city's footprint is something like 70 times higher than the footprints of equivalent cities in parts of sub-Saharan Africa. Now, this is not viable. It is not a basic long-term platform which we can continue to operate on. Less can be more, but it does require, for me, it's a bit like your list, it requires innovative strategic planning. We need to be much cleverer. We need to innovate rather than replicate what we've done in the past. It requires excellent governance, really good governance with bold, it's Gill's point, we need people in politics with guts to do different things. In fairness to our two mayors, the socialist and the conservative mayors of London, neither have shrunk from having congestion charging in London. And if you can do it in London, why can't you do it in Melbourne? If you want a quick fix in your city, one policy suggestion from an innocent abroad, try congestion charging, because you've got a wonderful city centre, you've even got a sort of Viennese-style Ringstrasse with a tram system, but you still allow cars. Unlimited access into your city centre. Absolute disaster zone. Sort it out now. Go for that health check, that city health check before it's too late. We need to inculcate really effective citizen engagement. And this was done before I heard any of you speak. You know, we need people to be absolutely engaged. They need to have ownership of the issues and ownership of the means of change. That's the important thing. Leonie, you said, I work for the government, I work in a university. I have my head in the clouds, but I also have my feet hard on the ground because I'm also chair of a community housing trust and a set of social enterprises in one of the poorest parts of Europe, not the UK, Europe. Every single part of Knowsley, which is part of Merseyside near the city of Liverpool, every part of Knowsley is in the worst 5% of places in the UK. But in that community, because it is a community housing trust for and by the citizens of Knowsley, there are a whole series of growing community heroes. Yeah? And they're important. They're the agents of change. Knowsley is possibly one of the least beautiful places you could ever encounter, but it's becoming beautiful and it's got beautiful people. So for me, it's people power that really makes the difference. Evidence, again, I'm replicating what's been said before, but let's just look at the scale of the problem. 1910, 1.5 billion people on the planet, about slightly less than 10% in cities. 1998, 6 billion, 50% in cities. Gill's point, 2050, 9.5 billion, 75% in cities. So the future is predominantly urban, and we cannot afford to continue with a pattern of urbanization and a mechanism for urbanization as a management system which continues to sort of project forward the growth paradigm. Equally, we've got to get to grips with this problem. The North, the developed countries, with 20% of the population consuming 80% of the resources, and the South 80% with 20% of the resources. Why? Because it's dumb. Because if you continue to operate on that basis of a divide between rich and poor countries, then basically resources are becoming more of a weapon by the day, and the wheel turns full circle. So can the majority world continue to grow at present rates, especially in developed countries? And how do we actually manage to bring about change in a way that produces sustainable urban development? So what do we need to do? We need to address the issue of the underpricing resources. We need to truly value things like labor and carbon and so on, so people pay the full price. You know, the polluter pays principle is great with things like carbon, but we need to think about the same in relation to labor exploitation and all the other things. Classic economic methods of measurement produce things called externalities, but we've often ignored or not properly accounted for them, or hidden them away, or charged them against another heading in the urban account. So we haven't looked at the true value, the true cost of pollution, of brownfields, of labor exploitation. Social factors have often been ignored and indeed equally accompanied by repression. We don't have good enough control tools. You know, it's one of the business school mantras. We need to be able to measure things in order to manage it. We don't often measure the change in our cities. We have too many policies which are top-down and disconnected from the realities and difficulties of delivery. Vested interests continue to dominate, but we can't ignore these issues. So what's to be done? Well, start to plan for reversing urban obesity. I'm sorry, I started off with a health analogy. I'm going to continue. We need to get healthier and fitter. When I went for my check, after 27 years of not seeing a doctor, he told me to do 3 things, and I've done 2.5. It's probably given me an extra 10, 15 minutes of life expectancy, but it's pleased the doctor. And more importantly, it's pleased my wife. She's a health professional, or was a health professional. That means we need to start reducing sprawl. Sorry about that. I know I'm treading on people's toes. I know it means big change for some people in terms of their normal mindset. It means minimizing resource use, reducing social inequalities, and so on. Read the evidence and act on it. One of my colleagues at the University of Leeds is a member of the International Panel on Climate Change. He's one of the team who've been recently doing recent work on rainforests. Very interesting. On the data now available for 2008, we know that the Amazon rainforest has ceased to be what we assume it is, a carbon sink, and has actually become a contributor to net global carbon. So we can't rely on rainforests to absorb our pollution. It's not going to get us, it's not a get out of jail free card for continuing to operate negative policies. We need to develop smart measurement and evaluation systems. The results can really shock you into action. Just read the recent announcements from the Chinese government. They actually discovered last year, as late as last year, that environmental damage was costing them £130 billion per annum, which was equivalent to, well, it was actually 3.98% of their annual GDP. And that has stimulated in China very quickly a new Chinese plan. And don't forget, The Chinese have a track record where they have first mover advantages in terms of introducing, for example, environmental technology. They tend to exploit those markets. They invest and then they exploit. So don't lag behind. Hitchhiker's Guide from the Galaxy, the most important book in the universe. On the front cover it says, don't panic. It's urgent, but it's not a cause for panic. We don't want to pile overboard and find ourselves in shark-infested waters. Don't panic, but do start planning. Tell people what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how they can become involved. Motivating, enabling, and supporting people in the community is the most important contribution you can possibly make to addressing some of these issues. And let's learn from each other. I love these fora. I mean, Chris, it's bad news that you and I have just burnt up God knows how much ozone layer to get here, but I only do it once every 4 years, so I've given you my chip for this 4-year period, and I do try to offset as much as I can. But let's learn from each other, because we can't afford for everybody individually to be reinventing the wheel. We need to share our experiences. We don't want copycat cities, but we need to share the toolkit which allows us to create distinct and distinctive cities. Look at what others are doing. Curitiba, for me, is a wonderful example of community ownership and engagement. And the recent work that's been done in Paris about what they call the post-Kyoto metropolis, I think gives you some really good clues. So people power, that's what I think will really change things in the end. But in the interim, don't panic, start planning, start thinking, start acting. Thank you.